My father was many things: athlete, adventurer, veteran, Olympian, coach, mentor, dog lover, husband, and of course, my father. Ever since he passed away last fall, my family and I have been completing the difficult but necessary task of deciding what to do with the physical objects left over from his extraordinary life. Of all the items we've sifted through, the uniforms and equipment, the photos and files, the maps and mementos, the things that have struck me most are not the trophies and medals or awards and honors, but the everyday items he selected and wore and loved and washed and wore again, the fabric of his life. As I've been considering each sweater and shirt, each hat and pair of well-worn boots, I've also been considering how I might repurpose some of these items into things I too can select and wear and love and wash and wear again. I know I can't save everything, that at the end of the day these things are just things, and not actually my father. Still, maybe I can create something comforting and familiar, something to hold me through the heartbreak and ground me in the grief. Something to remind me that no, he may not be here, but yes, you are. This is the shirt I'll be focusing on first for this project. It is a 100% wool button-up that I remember my dad wearing throughout my childhood. As you can see, I could very well just wear it like this. It's big, but not unreasonably big, but I would like to take it a slightly different direction, and that direction is going to be turning it into a coat. I'm going to do this by making some changes to the silhouette to make it feel more coat-like. I will shorten the hem, shorten the sleeves, add a lining, swap out the buttons for something a little bit bigger because I feel like that will make it feel more coat-like. I just think I'm going to be more likely to wear a coat than an oversized wool shirt. I also just kind of like the symbolic nature of slightly changing this, making something old but new, similar but different. It's a bit like me, right? I have all these influences from my father, like my love of animals and mountains, and of course my very sentimental nature. But I'm also me, my own person, with my own dreams and my own goals and my own ideas. Something old but new, similar but different. So let's make a coat. I began by hand washing the shirt. I used cool water and a mild no-rinse detergent specifically designed for wool. After gently wringing the shirt, I used a towel to squeeze out the excess moisture. I had some expert assistance with this step. Once the shirt was simply damp and no longer sopping, I laid it flat on a drying rack and let it dry overnight. Finally, it was time to grab some sewing tools and begin the alteration process. I began by removing a few inches from the hem of the shirt and unpicking the cuffs. The shirt had some moth holes that needed mending, so using the fabric I had just removed, I cut out small patches and laid one on top of each hole, doing my best to line up the pattern of the plaid with each patch. Then I carefully whip-stitched these down. As I have been sitting here working on these moth holes, I have been thinking about how of all the handicrafts, mending is just the most rife with metaphor. You are taking something damaged and very tenderly, very optimistically putting it back together, all while maintaining the understanding that it is just never going to be quite the same. That is how I feel. I don't think it will ever feel okay that I lost one of the people I love most in this world. Even if that doesn't feel okay, maybe I will. And so I sewed, knowing that the goal was not to make the imperfections invisible, but to simply reinforce the weak spots. Because holes and rips and tears and loss are not reversible. We can, however, stitch by stitch, restore our snags and our shirts and ourselves into something that might not be what it was before, but it can still be beautiful and it can still be strong. Now that the shirt is washed and mended, I would like to create a pieced lining that I quilt to a piece of batting and then insert into the coat for added structure and warmth. I've already gotten started on this process by using the shirt to draft a pattern to use for the lining. The way I did this was I took a pinnable surface. I just grabbed my bulletin board off the wall and put it on my desk. Then I laid down a piece of paper on top of that. I knew for the lining that I would need 3 separate pattern pieces, one for the coat back, one for the front, and one for the sleeve. So focusing on each of these different areas, I laid the shirt out and pinned all around the seam line, making sure things were smooth and straightened out. I removed the pins and removed the shirt and was left with a bunch of little small holes in this brown craft paper. Then I took a marker and I marked out where all those different holes were. Using a ruler and a French curve and just eyeballing it, I connected all those lines and then added a very generous seam allowance and cut the pattern pieces out. This is what they look like. So once I had my pattern pieces created, I wanted to test the fit and see if this process worked. I used this old cotton bed sheet and cut out a shirt front, a sleeve, and the back, and assembled them. And so how did it work? Well, I think pretty well. Here is a sample of it pinned into this half of the coat. You put it on very carefully. I think it feels really nice. So now that I feel good about the pattern pieces for the lining, it is time to actually construct it, and I think this will be the most fun part. I pulled out these old quilting books that I have. These are just full of different ideas and inspiration. It's actually a bit overwhelming. So I had a great time flipping through these and have decided on 2 potential different designs. I love the idea of doing a bear paw block. I did call my dad Papa Bear, but I think I'm going to go with this star design for even more sentimental reasons. That means it is sentimental story time. As my dad's health was declining last summer, I was working a job across the country that meant a tremendous amount to me. I was surrounded by some of the most creative, inspired, and generous people I have ever met. One of those people, who also happens to be my employer, was making these beautiful paper stars, and she was giving them to us as wishes. So this is my wish. The time during which she was making these stars was the time when I was learning my father was going to be starting hospice care. I flew home to help out for a bit, and I thought it would be nice if I brought my star with me and gave my wish to him. After sitting with it for a moment, the cheeky devil handed it back to me. And I was like, no, that's yours. And he told me, I've made my wish, and I made it for you. So now stars and shooting stars have become this very meaningful, comforting symbol for me that make me think of my dad. It's the reason that I went and drove into the mountains in early January to watch a meteor shower. I thought it might be kind of a cool goal this year to see if I could count 83 shooting stars. Why 83? 83 would have been the age that he turned this year. I'm not sure how many shooting stars I saw in January, but I'm going to add some to my coat. The next step was to prepare the pieced fabric for quilting. I laid out each section on a layer of batting and used safety pins to temporarily hold them together. For the actual stitching, I knew I could either sew the pieces together by machine or by hand. I wanted to do mine by hand. I not only prefer the look of hand quilting to that done by a machine, but also hand sewing is a very portable and meditative craft. You can take it very nearly anywhere. My father loved to explore and was happiest when outside, moving through beautiful landscapes. It is a trait I am grateful to have inherited from him, and we spent a lot of time together in the mountains where he raised me. Lately, however, life has taken me far from these mountains, which can make me feel far from him. I find that the more unfamiliar my life becomes to how my father knew it, the more I begin to feel a little unfamiliar to myself. So I thought it would be a comfort to carry my quilting with me, something to slowly stitch together as I navigate new places and paths. Which is exactly what I did. The quilting is complete. It has been months since I first began working on this project. I am now in an entirely different season and state. I mean that physically, but it also probably applies mentally and emotionally. As I was working on this, I realized that this is the first time I have hand quilted something to this extent, and you can really see the evolution of my stitches depending on which piece of the lining you're looking at. In the earlier pieces, it is quite big and loose. As I went on, I kind of got into a rhythm and it became more uniform and neat. There's this very tedious part of my personality that is tempted to pull out the earlier stitching and make it a bit neater. I am choosing to resist that particular perfectionist urge and embrace this as just yet another symbol of the grief process, which is, it's different every day. What next? I will cut the pattern pieces out using that pattern I made months ago, stitch them together, insert them into the jacket and stitch all that down, hem it, add some cuffs, and swap out the buttons. So yeah, not too much. Anyway, let's get going. So here are the lining pieces. I have two shorter pieces for the front, one big piece for the back, and then for the sleeves, I decided to quilt some satin fabric to make the jacket easier to put on. You will often see in ready-to-wear coats that the sleeves are lined with a slinky fabric, just so that your arm can groove on in there more easily. I'm pretty pleased with how they turned out. Part of the reason I made such a generous seam allowance when I drafted these patterns is because I was worried that the fabric was going to shrink from the hand quilting, and it totally has. This is hanging off of the piece, but that's fine because I still have room to work with here. It's time to cut my pattern pieces out from this fabric that I've spent hours of my life making. Let's do it. So I think I'm going to sew a cuff back onto the shirt, and because there is this sleeve placket here, I think I need to sew some sort of opening into the sleeve lining so that the jacket and lining will open out together so I can button and unbutton it. I took a look through one of my favorite vintage sewing books. While I was looking, I pressed some flowers in there, so let's check on those. These are forget-me-nots that I picked on one of my stitching excursions. What am I going to do with them? I'm not sure, but I thought they were rather poignant. And then this is what I plan to do to the sleeve lining. The book calls it a slashed opening. First, I cut a wide strip of fabric to use as a facing and marked where I needed the opening to line up with the placket of the shirt. I pinned it to the sleeve, right sides together, and used a small stitch length to sew very closely on either side of the marked line, taking a couple tiny stitches across the top. Then I snipped to the point, being careful not to cut through the stitching, and turned the facing to the inside of the sleeve. I pressed and pinned that down, and then hand-stitched it to the quilt batting. This is what they look like from the inside, and this is what they look like from the outside. Then it was time to put the lining pieces together. I sewed the shoulder seams first. I unpicked my hand quilting in the seam allowance, trimmed away the extra bulk of the batting, and pressed the seams open. I then used a million pins to attach the sleeves to the body of the lining. Next, I took a needle and thread to hand baste the seam in place before removing all the pins. I often hand baste sleeve seams before taking them to the machine. It is an extra step, but it's so helpful for checking whether you have any puckers along the shoulder cap before you machine stitch anything down. And once you're at the machine, you don't have to worry about hitting any pins as you navigate stitching tricky shape. I used a tailor's ham to press this seam and repeated all these steps for the side seams, which I did off camera. All right, I have inserted the lining into the jacket, and now what I need to do is stitch it down. I have sewn along the seam allowance here, and then I will trim away the quilt batting, fold this under, press it down. For the neckline, I'll do the same thing, but I will need to clip it first since it's going around a curve. Also, I took a look at the sleeves, and my slash opening here seemed to work really well. It lines up with the placket super nicely. Here you can see I returned to my old friend thread basting to hold the lining in place. I did the same with the hem. I had some red bias binding on hand, so I thought it would make a nice accent to use this to cover the raw edge of the hem. And oh hey, here is even more thread basting. Seriously, I find doing this so useful. I know it's more work, but holding all the pieces together like this makes everything so much more secure while you're working with it. And your thread won't get tangled around the pinpoints if you're hand stitching things in place, which is just what I did. Friends, I have neglected a crucial component of this project: pockets. I have been working on this project in fits and bursts for about 6 months now. I drove it across the country with me and back again, and not once did I think, hey, maybe you should add some pockets. Now, could I just keep going and make this a pocketless jacket? Sure, I could do that, but if I'm going to be investing this much time and intention and effort and energy into making a meaningful keepsake garment, I want it to be something that I use regularly in my life. I really feel that a lack of pockets is going to be the thing that keeps me from reaching for this, because where else am I going to keep my chilly hands and my little snacks and all the interesting things I find on the ground? I gotta add pockets. I've decided to go with welt pockets. Welt pockets are a hidden type of pocket that are framed by a narrow strip of fabric. Now, I have never made a welt pocket before, so I've been conducting some experiments. I started by making this paper version. And so once I had sort of puzzled this out, I made a couple sample pockets. This little strip of fabric here is the welt, and then you slide your hand in like this. This is your pocket bag where you hide all your treasures. The thing about these is this nifty little pocket bag hides between the outer layer and the lining. So all that painstaking hand stitching I did to put the lining into the coat, it's coming out. I don't think I can procrastinate anymore. Let's go. The fabric I have to work with for my pocket project is what I cut from the hem and the sleeves. I even unpicked the front bands and where the hem was folded up to eke out as much fabric real estate as possible. I'm saving these larger pieces for the cuffs I'm going to remake, which leaves these for the pockets. If I take this and I fold it in half, behold, pattern matching! I think I will need to stitch together a couple of pieces to do the same on this side. Does that make any sense at all? It barely made sense to me. I think I used every brain cell available to me trying to figure out how to pattern match the welts, and I'm still not sure how I did it. There was cutting, and measuring, and marking, and sewing, and snipping, and basting, always basting. Then I checked if it all worked. I have had a truly preposterous idea. So my next step in this process is to remake and reattach the cuffs. I want to make new ones rather than using the old ones, not only because I've cut into those, but because I need to shorten the sleeves, and I want the new cuffs to be a little less form-fitting and looser around the wrist than the original ones were. I've made a muslin and have determined that the cuff, once finished, should be about 2 inches tall by 12 inches long, which got me to thinking, what if I made miniature star blocks and lined the cuffs with them? So each cuff would have 6 star blocks parading around the inside. Now, I didn't know if sewing on this small of a scale is even possible, so I made a sample. It's so small. Do I have it in me to make 11 more of these? Let's find out. Another reason I really liked this idea is because I was able to use the scraps from cutting out the main lining. I already had all these diagonal lines sewn, and the pieces that make up the blocks are so small that I was able to get quite a few half-square triangles from them. I just find this level of resourcefulness very satisfying. Oh, the magic of video editing. These cuffs did not in fact take 20 seconds to make, but rather hours upon hours of tiny, detailed, fiddly work. I am thrilled with how they turned out. So I attached them to the sleeves and put the finishing touches on stitching the lining back in and removing my basting threads. The only thing left now is buttons. A couple of weeks after my father died, a bear visited my parents' house and tore down a branch of their apple tree. I used a hatchet to remove the broken branch and dragged it into their backyard. Neo found it very interesting. But what does this have to do with the jacket project? Well, the jacket project is complete. It feels a little bit surreal. I am currently sitting in my car because I could not sleep this morning, so I just got up and drove into the mountains to watch the sunrise. I figured that I would get some footage of the completed project while I'm here because it's not only very beautiful, but it is also a landscape that my dad loved and a place that I feel very close to him. So yeah, reveal coming in 3, 2, 1. Here it is, the most beautiful thing I have ever made. I am so happy with how this turned out. I worked so hard on making it as nice as I could, and I am so proud of myself. I just wish that I could show it to my dad because I think he would be really proud too. Something I find interesting about this project is that really the most exceptional part is the part that very few people are actually ever going to see. And I kind of love that about this project because I feel like it is just the perfect representation of any one of us. I think we all have these intricate inner lives that we hold close to our hearts that most people don't even know about. It's helpful for me when I think about being a bit more gracious with people in my life and in the world. I have no idea what their jacket linings look like. Another thing I really love about this project, and I will most likely also turn this into a metaphor, is I really love how much kind of scrappy resourcefulness went into it. Things like cutting off the hem and shortening the sleeves and reusing that fabric to mend the moth holes and make welts for the pockets. And I was even able to pattern match. You know, of course, the applewood buttons. The muslin was out of an old bed sheet, and then I cut up that and incorporated it as the red bits and the star blocks. It all just feels like a jigsaw puzzle that came together in a super satisfying way. At the same time, there is all this and more left over from the project. Bits of wool still, quilting scraps, the slashed openings that I almost entirely cut off when I shortened the sleeves, debris and detritus. And the sensation of standing here in the completed project with all these scraps in my hand just feels very apt, because there's definitely something that feels quite strange about taking what has been the most devastating loss of my life so far and creating something that is so intentionally crafted. And I don't just mean the jacket, I also mean this whole video, because if you are still watching, you know there's been background music and bits of clever editing and shots of me doing thoughtful things in nature. I do think that is authentic to me. Finding stories is definitely how I relate to the world and process experiences, but it's also only a part of grieving. There is this whole other part that looks a bit more like this. It is messy and unpredictable, and I have no idea what to do with it. And I bring that up because if you are grieving the loss of someone you love, maybe that's why you clicked on this video, you don't have to arrive at some enlightened, lofty relationship with your grief. You don't have to create some palatable, polished narrative. If that would help you, by all means, make the jacket, the video, the metaphors, but you don't have to, because if there's anything I have learned since saying goodbye to my father, it's this: there is no one right way to grieve. And so if that is you, I'm sorry. And I'm glad you're here. Thank you for watching. If you would like to stay here, feel free to subscribe. I'm hoping to load more videos. I have tons of ideas. I don't think they'll all be this intensive, but this was very worthwhile. And so are you. All right, bye.